Jazzcast Pros.
In a world where the wrong look, word, or tone could mean life or death, Black people developed an etiquette rooted in resilience. Before code switching even became a buzzword, our enslaved ancestors were already experts in adapting their behavior, their tone, and their mannerisms to navigate a world designed to suppress them. Today, I have with me Jazzy T, the CEO of Jazzcast Pros, and we will be discussing the history of oppression shaped by the way Black Americans navigate social spaces today and what can we reclaim for ourselves. And I just want to say this is a food for thought episode, and I'm calling it From Chains to Change. Welcome to the Grace and Grind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Pamela Brown-Grinion, and I'm the CEO of Totally Unique Educational Consultants and Totally Unique Institute of Excellence. And at Totally Unique, we use social and emotional development to help navigate you toward discovering the best versions of your authentic and healed self. So, Jazz, welcome back. Well, have you ever been on? I don't think so.
No, this will be my first time on this side of the microphone.
Yes.
I've been having a great time editing and producing. I think we're on 18 episodes now.
Yes. I'm so glad that you are here and that we're going to have this discussion because I think it's so very important to explore why we are and how we are the way we are in this 21st century.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to start off by saying for the listeners and the viewers, we had some conversations previous to jumping on this recording, Dr. Pamela and I, and we were talking about like the history of etiquette. And at first glance, you would think, well, finishing school is mainly for uber rich, kids that get sent off to boarding school and just rich kids all the way around, right? But then you explained to me how the disparities go way back and how actually people way back in the day, in the times of slavery, were having what you called forced etiquette.
Yeah.
So if you were living in the house, then you had certain manners that maybe your cousins, your sister, your brother in the field didn't have that same experience. So I really am excited to dip into this whole history of etiquette. But first, let me ask you, and for the listeners, again, I am not the expert. Dr. Pamela is the expert. I'm just happy to be here and facilitating this conversation. So what is etiquette by definition?
Well, first, I like to say what etiquette is not. And you hit on it. You hit the nail right on the head. It has nothing to do with your genetics. It has nothing to do with what you're going to inherit financially. It has nothing to do with your social, emotional, or your social economic status. It has nothing to do with the color of your skin. Etiquette can be learned. They are learned skills. And basically what it is a set of socially accepted behaviors that guide how people interact in various settings. So, in a wedding, you'd have different etiquette than you would per se at a basketball game, right? So it's socially accepted behaviors that guide how people interact with each other in various settings. But it is also a learned skill. And we will talk about that more as we delve a little bit into the history of etiquette and how it impacted us when we first came to the United States.
So talk to me more about, what you call like slave codes. So different ways of acting and manners and stuff. Like you said, the basketball court versus a 5-star dinner. How did that first come about? And give me more of the rich history.
All right. So basically, we know that predominantly Black people came to the United States during the slave passage on the ships, and we were brought over to the country to be slaves or servants, right? And so these slave codes were put in place, which meant that now the slave owners or white people were able to use the laws to legally use brutality and the forced slavery and oppression to control the enslaved people. And this actually contributed to some of our systemic racism and discrimination that we see to this day, because it's pretty much, some of us still have that slave mentality or that slave mindset as we hear in our culture a lot. And so eventually the slave codes were replaced by Black codes where Now you have the laws where you're restricted. Your freedom is restricted. Your wages aren't fair. You're prevented from any type of political participation or having any type of economic progress or any type of social mobility. And that was in addition to, even though it changed from slave codes to black codes, now you have these restrictions in addition to the brutality and the oppression that, they were legally able to do this because it was law. We were chattel. We weren't considered human beings. We were lower than animals. We had no rating in the social strata at all. And so when you
Not even a
combine,
full man, right?
no, not even, not
3/5 of a person.
right, not even. And so that's really where that came from. And when that happened, or I guess I should say an example of some of the things that happened with these slave codes and how they were utilized. Well, you remember the movie Roots when they kept beating Kunta Kinte saying your name is Toby, and he kept saying no, my name is Kunta, and the name was beaten into him. The American name was beaten into him. The religion, they had to practice Christianity, right? They weren't able to practice being a Muslim. They had to practice, and then they weren't allowed to learn reading and writing. Were not allowed. And then the languages changed. So we no longer spoke our tribal languages from Africa. We had to learn, English as a second language.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So English as a second language for Black people, and I know we don't think about it like that, but English as a second language for our ancestors that came over on the slave ships. And also the relationships. You weren't able to marry, or you were told who to marry based on the size and stature of a man. A woman would have to marry in many cases so that they could produce, or bucks, as they called the men. They wanted young, strapping bucks, and that's where that terminology came from. You also have the different roles from if you worked in the house or if you worked in the fields. There was a different expectations in your conduct and your attire and your grooming and your speech.
Yeah.
So your yes, ma'am, and no, sir. It wasn't just about being polite. It was about self-preservation. So,
Yeah.
and that was an etiquette all in and of itself. And that's really where etiquette began for Black people in the United States.
So let's dig into this a little bit more. I love when you were explaining, you were literally, it was beaten into you, right? So
You,
it wasn't just about, oh, I have good manners. I'm polite because I want to be polite. I'm doing what I'm told to do.
you had,
And even we see, in the times of Emmett Till, don't look a white person in their eye. Like
right.
even that type of stuff is considered etiquette. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you couldn't have eye contact because you weren't allowed to look upon their countenance. That was a sign of disrespect.
Oh,
You could only speak when you were spoken to. And then you also had to have a certain tone, and the respect had to be there with the yes, sir, no, sir, yes, master, no, master. If a white person approached you, you had to step to the side. If you were on a sidewalk,
mm,
you had to step off of the sidewalk. And basically, you had to make yourself invisible and just be submissive in the midst
right.
of being invisible. Now, can you imagine I'm being submissive, but while I'm being submissive, I also have to become invisible, right?
Mm,
And so your identity crisis, imposter syndrome, all of those things, you can trace that all the way. We weren't calling it that, but
yeah.
that's exactly what it was. And it was a systemic identity crisis. It was systemic imposter syndrome. And we don't think about it like that when we think about how we are and who we are today. But if we just, trace back, 5 or 6 generations, our ancestors were more than likely slaves.
Right. And so just with that in mind, and we started to see, even like 1800s, there were some Black people who were able to rise in social status, and they were able to, do certain things and be involved in politics, even though we don't really hear about this a lot during Black History Month. But do you think that there was some connection between, those who had this sort of etiquette training, if you want to call it that, even though it was forceful, and those who did not. And when we look at their forks in the road of who got to elevate and who basically just ended up in, the ghetto, I guess is the best way I can put it, right? Because it was
Yeah.
definitely a split. So, how does etiquette connect with that?
Absolutely. So I would say two things. Number one, because of the slaves being in the house in comparison to the slaves that were in the field, there was a certain amount of decorum and comportment that they had to have, right? So they were taught to stay in your place or act right, and based on who was there and their role in the home, right? So there were some unexpected outcomes that came out of Black people or the slaves that were in the home versus in the slaves. So, for example, there was a learned civilized culture and conduct that they were expected to have. They couldn't be, dancing around and singing and wearing clothes that were unbecoming of the master or the master's guest. And in some cases, they learned to read and write. Now, not legally, they had to sneak into it, but in some instances, some of the white children taught their slave playmates, the children of the slaves, to read and write. But the primary thing that happened, Jazz, was that there was a passing down of information from the slaves that worked in the house. When they went back to their slave quarters, they actually began to teach the children and their homes and their family members and people in the slave community the same type of behaviors that they were learning or had learned in the home. And that's referred to as passing down, right? And we
Mm.
saw that carry on in our community with our mothers, our aunties at church. They passed down different attributes to Black children, how we're supposed to behave. The second thing is a social strata happened among African Americans, whereas the people that were more learned, if you will, or the people that were able to behave in a more civilized way, then they were able to acquire more opportunities. Also, after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, you had a lot of not only white on Black racism, but Black on Black racism. And that helped to perpetuate this social strata amongst the Black community. We had colorism happening with the brown paper bag test. Are you lighter than a brown paper bag? If you are considered a better Black person than someone that was darker skinned. And then also biracial African Americans or biracial people during that time, they've received preferential treatment big time because they were considered light skinned, pretty hair, right? And in some instances, they were too white to be Black and too Black to be white, you know? And, a lot of people like, I can't relate to that because from what I understand, I know I do have some white in me, but I look like a Black person. So I identify and people identify with me as Black. But for people that are biracial, they may not feel like there are opportunities or they may not feel that that's something positive, right?
Mm.
So that social strata was happening in our community. And then our more fair skinned leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T, Frederick Douglass, they were able to come out and actually, fulfill some of these roles in our Black community that were considered prestigious or respectful in comparison to the person that worked in the field who may not have this, civilized look or civilized type of conduct.
Interesting. That's a lot to take in. I mean, have to just take a beat and process a lot of that there. And so I'm sensing there's a connection. So backing up just a little bit, people who enslaved people who were chosen to work in the house weren't necessarily fairer or light skinned or
Right.
mixed or anything like that, right? So they received this etiquette. And so how did that go from, okay, you had the quote unquote home training, right? And so you passed that down to your kids and through the church and everything, right? But then some mixed person comes along who has no home training at all and may get the preferential treatment. So I'm trying to understand that's a bit of a disconnect. It's not like following the line of logic that I would think that,
Right.
oh, the light skinned people were there, or maybe they were the product of, the master entangling with the enslaved people,
Right.
and therefore now you have a mixed kid. But it really wasn't that. So I got that on one shoulder of how did the lighter the better come to be. And then also on the other side, as a biracial person, like, and you probably have heard this too, like, oh, you're acting white.
Correct.
So those might be two different things, but just kind of get your thoughts on both of those ideas.
Yeah. So the lighter the better. If you were a fair skinned person, you were more than likely biracial, which meant that your mother probably had some type of sexual or had a sexual relationship with one of the slave owners or someone white, which meant you had white in you. So you're better, right? Because white was the considered to be the better culture. And so just like I said earlier, there was that white against black, but there was also that black on black. And we developed this for ourselves. So we actually adopted that in our community and our culture. I'm trying to remember when someone kidnaps you and then you begin to fall in love with them. I can't remember the terminology, but
Oh, yeah.
it's kind of like that type of ideology. You're light skinned, you have white in you, so you're probably you're better. We created that amongst ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Because we wanted to have our own social strata as well to position people in different places. Okay, so you're light skinned, you get to be a politician. You're dark skinned, you have to be a blue collar worker. You're light skinned, you get to be a teacher. You're dark skinned, you have to go and work in a steel mill or something like that.
Mhm.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that because you are a biracial or mixed race that you were better, but that helped to develop and create that social strata within the Black community. And that's how that came to be.
So there's a lot of stigma right
A
now
lot.
going on, and just the assumption that anyone of African descent like doesn't know how to act. Maybe they're not trustworthy, or oh, I could go into a lot of current events that's happening right now with DEI and, well,
Right,
blame diversity. That's why the plane fell out of the sky, or the Black
right,
Hawk crashed into the other plane because of DEI.
right.
Anyways, we won't go into all of that, but just in general, I feel like right now we are dealing with the stigma more than we have in a long time, based on the fact that they want to get rid of programs that may help any of us. And I say may because there's a whole study about DEI actually benefiting primarily white women. So, joke's on them. But what is this stigma about, like, Black people can't do as good a job as somebody else?
So pretty much that stigma comes from slavery as well, because that was the premise for why we were here in the first place. We only could do this kind of work, right? And if we did other work, it had to be perceived as you can't. And that's just another way to attack your self-esteem, to further drill into you that you aren't good enough. You can't possibly know how to do that. Like, have you ever heard someone say to you, if you're in a conversation, someone non-black say to you, because I've received it many times, "Oh, you speak very well."
Yeah, like they're surprised.
Right. And to me, it's like, as opposed to what? Because there's an expectation that we don't speak well. Why? Because, during slavery, we had English was our second language and we spoke a broken language. We're trying to adapt to this new language, this new life. And so it's the expectation, and it's to make you feel as though you are not good enough. And it's just simply based on the color of our skin. You can't be that good. You shouldn't be that good. How dare you be that good? And it's just to further create that identity crisis so that you develop that imposter syndrome of, I'm not good enough. And there are studies to actually show this.
I want to ask you a question that just came to mind. So you have been an etiquette coach for
almost 30.
Okay, almost 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And you have intentionally worked with like inner city school districts and just really trying to bring this polish and poise, personal skills, life skills into these communities where you feel that it's needed the most, right?
Right.
Have you ever had any pushback from either adults or possibly even the children in the program, like, oh, you're trying to make me act white?
Right. I've received that more times than I can count. I've not been hired for assignments after submitting a proposal because they felt like I was trying to take us back to the olden days or, make us be submissive or act white, as if behaving properly means that you need to turn in your black card. Because you behave properly, because you adopt a certain set of precepts that govern your code of conduct, it does not mean that you have abandoned Black culture. It just means that you're learning how to code switch into these different social settings. So remember when I said, etiquette is, a set of social skills that allows us to interact with each other in different social settings, right? And so when you learn these different skills, and let me just say, it's not about where to put the fork, which glass to drink from. It's not about that. It's about your own personal code of conduct that you adopt for yourself. Like back in the day during the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King said, we're going to be nonviolent. Okay. That was sending an expectation to use etiquette, right? There's a certain code of conduct that we're going to have. When Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high. That's just a different way of saying what Martin Luther King said, but, talking about our own self-dignity and how we have to carry ourselves. Because the fact of the matter is, racism is happening to this day, right? It's happening to this day. Removing DEI is a form of racism. It is. It doesn't matter how you slice it. It's a form of racism. Remember when I was saying the Black codes, we remove freedoms? This is removing freedom. This is removing financial freedoms. This is not providing the necessities that, people need in order to better themselves, to have a better chance at life, to even the playing field, even though we know it's going to take hundreds of years to even the playing field. There's a study about that too. But yeah, it's another way of pulling back a culture that it has been rapidly progressing. Black women are the highest number of educated people to get doctoral degrees.
Yeah.
Black women,
Right.
and it's like, where do they come from? Right. So if we can't strip them one way, we can strip them this way. We might not be able to strip the people that have acquired this education. They're self-sustaining. They're making a livable wage. We might not be able to attack them, to impact their livelihood too much, but we can attack these people that may not have the education, that are dependent upon these systems that are really systems to keep you where you are. They're not made to progress you. So if we attack their finances, if we move away daycare and Black mothers can't go to work,
Yeah.
if we remove DEI and say that because you're Black, you can't get a certain type of college scholarship,
I feel,
it,
yeah, that's
if
a big one.
if we tamper with the educational system that is already not a level playing field for Black children, especially in these inner city and rural Black children, if people would pay attention to all of these different systems that are being tampered with, if we take away WIC, right? If we pay attention to the different systems that are being attacked and who they primarily serve, we will see that racism is alive and well, and that is perpetuated throughout our government, especially our new current administration.
Right.
It's racism, and I don't even know how no other way to say it. It's racism.
So, in your corner of the world, how can etiquette help to be used as a tool to empower people at this time, especially for, upward mobility? There's a lot of people that, maybe they don't want to go to college, but there's a lot of other ways that they can, be an entrepreneur, or they can, rise up and be a manager, or be, working up in higher level C-suite. So, how can what you offer, your services, polishing skills, help those people? And is there any study as to, people who have these skills end up in these type of jobs?
Absolutely. So, with my dissertation, I studied if children that are exposed to social skills programs with a focus on etiquette, if they participate in those types of programs during adolescence, it has been tested, tried, and proven that they further themselves educationally, they are elevated more in the community, they are able to have better relationships. They are less likely to be involved with the prison system or jail system or the
Okay.
legal system. So yeah. So now to the beginning part of the question, how does it help? So again, having manners, just treating people properly, and having etiquette, learning how to operate and function in a civil society, it really is all about you. It's not about anyone else. It is, what do you adopt for yourself? Now, I call it my own personal Declaration of Independence and my own personal constitution, because the way I present myself, the way I speak, I want to learn how to be a better person. And that's just another form of education, right?
Right.
It's non-accredited education. When I participated with the British School of Excellence, I went through a non-credited etiquette program so that I could say I have a credential from the top etiquette school to bring back to my community to teach. So it's just education. There isn't
Mm.
anything wrong with us learning skills that are going to position us better in the workplace, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you have someone that's a rah-rah chick, yang, 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 neck twisting, screaming, hollering, cursing, smelling like weed, always fussing, always spilling tea, in comparison to a person that does not, create drama, follow drama. They're articulate. They dress well. They smell nicely. They behave properly, right?
Mhm.
Who would you want to have representing your organization? You're probably going to pick the person that represents themselves with respect and dignity
Mhm.
before you choose the person that does not. And so for me, the reason why I do it is because I know that, back in the day, this was passed down from generation to generation. When we went to church, when we went to Sunday school, you learned something about how to act. The Black Panthers talked about Black power. Civil rights leaders talked about behaving with Black pride. Our parents taught us you don't air out your dirty laundry in public. You don't go out of the house looking any kind of way. When you go out, you act like you have some home training. Like,
Yeah.
these things were passed down and they were expected. It was a code of conduct. It was a code for our culture that we lived by proudly. And somewhere we lost that.
Yeah. I want to
Somewhere we lost it.
I want to share something with you and with the audience, and hopefully it'll be taken the right way. Pure intentions only. So, growing up, I'm an only child raised by a single white mother in a white community, right? And so, growing up, like, my exposure to Black people was on television, right? And maybe like a sprinkle here and there, if one would move into the suburbs and stuff like that, right? So that was pretty much it. So you know how the news is, right? If it
Right.
bleeds, it leads, first of all. And if a Black person did something positive, we'll put it over here in case we have nothing else. But as soon as a Black person does something negative, front page news, this is what we're leading with, headline story, right? So this is the perception that has been put out there, right? Like, oh wow, like dangerous,
Right, right,
loud, and,
right. It's sensationalized.
all of the negative things, right?
Yeah,
And then I started hanging out with, people from like other suburbs, like other Black people in other suburbs. And somehow, some way, somebody introduced the event called the Jack and Jill. I didn't know what it was. To me, it was a party. So it was the Jack and Jill party that we would go to like once a year. When I went to that event, I was like, these people aren't anything like what's on the news. Like,
right,
this is like some next level type stuff that I
right,
was very intrigued by.
right.
So, can you talk a little bit more about the importance of organizations such as the Jack and Jill? I know previous episodes you mentioned you're part of something called Links,
Yeah.
and I know you're in a sorority as well. So, yeah, just talk a little about those organizations and how it kind of helps to bridge a gap.
Okay, let me just clarify. I am a member of the Links, but I am not a member of the D9, but I do
Oh.
aspire.
Oh, okay,
So
gotcha.
that's okay. So yeah, so these programs came out of a need because we weren't allowed to go to the Girl Scouts. We weren't allowed to go to the Y because they didn't have programs for us. We weren't allowed to participate in Black debutante programs because there was no such thing.
Mm,
So our social clubs like the Jack and Jill, like the AKAs, Alpha Kappa Alphas, like Delta Sigma Thetas, like the Zeta Phi Betas, like the Eastern Stars, these programs were created so that we could have something in our community where we could educate our Black girls, where we could have coming out balls and we could present our Black girls to societies. And so it was also where the Black girls learned how to be polished, how to be refined. The home training was further instilled. We don't do this. We don't do that because we couldn't. We couldn't afford to because of how it would look, because we're already a part of this stigma, right? And so these programs were created out of, we didn't have anything for us. And so they're critical, critical, critical to our community. And still to this day, these programs are educating younger Black females. I did an etiquette workshop for the Zetas last month, right? It's
okay.
still critical to this day. And I love the fact that the sororities are still following the passing down model that our elder ancestors used to use because it's quite critical. Now, a lot of times etiquette may not be taught at some of these programs, right? Or they may be taught incorrectly because someone Googled something or YouTube
Yeah.
something and now I'm teaching etiquette. Well, you run the risk of having somebody teaching, people the wrong skills, right? And what's wrong with it? What's wrong with learning how to use the right fork? What's wrong with learning how to have great posture? What's wrong with learning how to articulate and enunciate and pronunciate? What's wrong with learning your verb tenses? Like what's wrong with presenting yourself in a positive manner? Why does that turn into something negative for, onlookers?
Yeah.
That's what I want to know. Why me behaving in a way that is positive and in the best light of myself? Why do I have to be bougie? Why do I have to be extra? Why do I have to think I'm white? Why do I have to think I'm better than other people? Why does it have to come across to other people that I'm trying to be something that I'm not, or I am trying to act like I'm better, right? I want to be better.
Oh
But
my
it's for
goodness,
me. It's
yes.
my own personal declaration of independence. This is what I choose for me, right?
Even when people used to say, "Oh, she thinks she's all that."
Yeah.
And I think you are too. That's what I used to always
Yeah.
respond, like, "Yeah, oh, she thinks she's so pretty, and you're pretty too." Like,
Right.
so what? Why can't we be extra and
Right.
whatever, like, and all of these things that are elevating us?
Right.
There's a saying that used to be, very prominent, and you'd be like, "Oh, oh, he's holding me down, she's holding me down," and it was said in a way of like, "Okay, that's my friend, they're gonna hold me down," right?
Right.
But I'm like, I don't want friends to hold me down. I
Right.
want friends to lift me up.
Lift me up. Correct.
There's a lot of that stigma again about bettering ourselves, and At this point, another phrase that comes to mind is, we have to work twice as hard to get half as
As
much.
much.
So even especially in this climate, if I have an opportunity to, learn, like you said, okay, I'm at the black tie event, like even getting invited to some of these things, like these big corporate functions where they have all this silverware and all these glasses and like
Right.
four different plates and stuff. Right. So Becky might go in there and, pick up the wrong knife and pick up the wrong, glass. And it's like, oh, haha, Becky, whatever. But if you do it, it's like, oh, see, look, they don't even deserve to be here. Why is she even here? She
Right.
don't even know what fork to use. And
Right.
so it's not fair, it's not just, it's not equal.
It's just what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah, it's what we have to deal with every single day. And that's why I said this is a food for thought segment, because I have a lot of white women that listen to this podcast as well. And I just want to give people a moment to just take pause and just think about some of the nuances that Black people and Black women have had to endure, and just think about, maybe, just maybe, that some of the ways that we behave in some of the situations that we are in, it's not our fault, right? Some of these things that we're experiencing and the pains and the emotional distraught that we've gone through, some of this stuff relates all the way back to slavery. So let me say it like this. You take somebody like yourself, biracial today, right? Imagine someone where their biracial component started during slavery, right? So it's
Mhm.
fair skinned. Even if they get with a dark skinned person, they're probably going to be fair skinned, and
Yeah.
just imagine the identity crisis and stigma that you may have gone through.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a long line of happenings, historically, that impact us, that still impacts us today. And some of us can't get away from it, you know, and some of us still behave like, we're still on the plantation, because we can't shift our mindset to, this is 21st century. There are a whole lot more opportunities available to me than were available to my great, 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 great grandparents, right? Like I have opportunities that they didn't have. But a lot of times we can't take advantage of the opportunity because our mindsets have not shifted, or we haven't healed from the pains that have run through our genealogy historically. My sixth great grandmother could have been molested. That generational curse could have come through my genealogy up till me, and they didn't know how to handle it. And when it happened to their daughter, they couldn't tell their daughter how to handle it. And when it happened to her daughter, she couldn't tell her daughter how to handle it. And when it happened to her daughter, she couldn't tell her daughter how to handle it. And now we have 5 generations alive with sexual assault, and nobody's talking about it, and nobody knows how to handle it. And then people end up with these identity crises and imposter syndrome that impacts relationships, that impacts the way they parent, that impacts the type of employee they are, that impacts the type of business owner they are, that impacts the type of friend they are. You know what I'm saying? Because we haven't dealt with the emotional side of what slavery has done to our community. And that's huge. And that's why I do what I do the way I do it. I don't just teach people how to set a table. I want to work with you so that you have an experience with yourself, to your soul, to the core of you, to find out what are those things historically in your life, that what are the epigenetics that has happened in your life that has caused you to be the person that you are today. Let's do some discovering, some exploring and discovering, and then work on you becoming the best, your best, authentic, totally unique, healed self. Because the emotions also go with the social skills. Because I was that person that was polished and I looked great and I presented myself well, but on the inside, I was emotionally distraught. because no one taught me how to deal with my emotions. I didn't have the language to even, I didn't even know what it was called. All I know is I had a bunch of adverse childhood experiences that impacted me into adulthood. And I know for a fact that some of this was handed down generation to generation to generation. And it wasn't until I started to not just polish my outside, but polish my inside as well and make some changes with myself, about myself. But it started with my mindset. And I began to discover who I really am as a person and why I am the way I am. And I wanted to always be better, to do better, because you can acquire more. I can go anywhere, Jazz. I can stand on a corner and hang with the dudes shooting dice, or I can go to the White House and have dinner with, I'll say, I could have gone and had dinner with Barack Obama because and I can go to
or Clinton
uh,
or Bush
yeah,
or,
correct. But if I have my druthers, I would love to
yeah.
have dinner with Barack Obama, him and Shelley. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Of
So
course.
yeah. So yeah, etiquette is not just behavior, but it's also the emotions, right? Because imagine if you were getting beaten, mutilated, your freedoms were taken away, your language, there were some emotions tied to the etiquette that was expected.
Yeah,
You can't separate them. You can't,
absolutely.
because your experiences, there are emotions connected with your experiences. And so when you come and work with me as your etiquette coach, I'm working on you on your social emotional development. I'm not just working on, how to sit at the table and how to behave. Yes, that's etiquette, but etiquette also has to deal with how does your emotions control your conduct. And if you don't work on that, then your recipe is all wrong.
Well, that's amazing. So, Dr. Pam, is there any way that like grown women can talk to you and get some coaching from you? And we have a lot of entrepreneurs here on the Jazzcast Pros Network. And so I'm feeling like we may even need to do another episode where we specifically talk about, the professional training and how that can help you as an entrepreneur. And I'll just say this because there is a bit of a stigma of Black business equals no customer service. But then there's also Black businesses that give you impeccable service, right?
Right.
They're fewer and far between. So is there any way that a grown person and a female entrepreneur can connect with you to get some of these skills?
Absolutely. I work with women and adults of all ages, and you can hit me up on social at I am Dr. Pamela, DRPAMALA. Yeah, you can hit me up on social media or, just give me a call, 585-454-9827, and we can chat. But yeah, everybody needs etiquette. Like I said, it's not just fork and knife and table setting. It's the emotional part that we need to heal from, but it's also right conduct. And it's something that you adopt for yourself. It's not acting white or, it's not any of that. It's just learning and choosing to behave in a way that is in the best representation of yourself.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for letting me be a part of this conversation. And the audience, I hope that you are getting so much out of this. It's starting to open your eyes to some of the ways that we can take control of our own destiny, especially in this current political climate. So do you want to wrap it up with your tagline?
Absolutely. Well, you guys, I would just like to say thank you, Jazzy T, for being here. And thank you to my listeners. And I would like to say, as I always say to you, go out and create, not have, create your totally unique day on purpose. Thank you so much for being here with the Grace and Grind podcast.